I'm Dan Drake on Visitor Network TV. With us today is Andrew Vorce, the Director of Planning for the town of Nantucket. Andrew, it's great to have you. It's overdue, and that's my fault, not yours. But I'd love to talk to you about zoning in general and then a couple of specific things. But sort of what's going on in the zoning and planning area at this point? And when we get to it, touch on the whole Mid-Island or Old South Road area in terms of the potential there and what impact that could have. But let's start generally with what's happening.
Well, Dan, I'm sure you know, we're 5 years into our master plan. The master plan was voted in 2009, and as part of that, there was an implementation schedule that was laid out. So there's been a lot of zoning changes, and we do them in small, bite-sized groups so individual neighbors can understand them. No one has offered yet to sort of give us carte blanche to do all the zoning changes we think are necessary. So you have to go through the process.
Is that possible? Could the voters give you the carte blanche to do that?
They could, but zoning history-wise here has been very contentious, and I think, people want to feel comfortable with it, want to feel comfortable with the process. That's why, we...
But it's only when your ox is being gored that you're uncomfortable and contentious, right?
Correct. I think one good thing that happens through all the zoning changes, at least for the people that live in the areas, they get to understand more about, what is and isn't allowed. So what we're going to see this year, Old South Road, there's been some major property transfers out there. It's an area that's been targeted for rezoning for some time. You've heard me talk about the gradual phasing out of the residential commercial zoning district, which is continuing. There are 11 areas left. The largest is that area on Old South Road, the property owned by the Valero family and formerly owned by the Glowacki family interests. There's been an area plan working, which includes residents from Noshup, residents from the other area that have been looking, and there'll be a proposal this year to make some changes.
All right.
So
is that sort of what drives the changes? What makes the planning department decide that a change is necessary and therefore it has to come to town meeting?
Yep. Again, I'm going to refer back to the master plan because there were a series of changes that were given outside deadlines. So by 2020, we would sort of phase out RC2. We do look for opportunities where there's been changes, where there's property owners that are willing to work with us. We will get to a point where, there may be conflicts, and those decisions will have to go to town meeting. But zoning, as I think you know, is a 2/3 majority of zoning. Of the voters at town meeting have to approve zoning changes. I look forward to the day when they're all done, like a lot of people. But, we're rewriting a 1972 zoning bylaw that had its strengths, but had a lot of weaknesses.
How far out do you see this playing? How many more years?
I see at least 5 more years, not of as substantial amount of changes that but more concentrated. But there will be, I think, 5 more years.
Is there anything on the agenda for the special town meeting?
There's one zoning change which is in the southwest quarter, which is moving an area that's mostly open space. It's been really a targeted area of the conservation group since 1970 to our lowest intensity zoning district. So I think that follows up on conservation work that's already done. I think it's a fairly uncontroversial article.
Why do you feel it's necessary to do that? If it's already protected in essence, why do you feel it's necessary to take that extra step?
Well, some land isn't necessarily always protected, and there are decisions that could be made to change its status. So after, by different boards in the future, by changing circumstances, at least by putting following through on the conservation effort and making the zoning basically match the underlying status, if it will at least make the decision to change that a community decision as well. So, I think if people, especially in this area, expect this to be kind of a forever wild area, the zoning should follow through on that.
Because in theory, it couldn't be, might not be, such as we had with the field station, such as we now have with the Boy Scout
The Boy
camp.
Scout properties. These things can,
Yeah.
what do you call it? The humane, the animal shelter.
hospital.
It was another example, right? So,
But that was a little different. I mean, the land use was provided for. It was it was. I mean, in essence, the land use was already provided for in the zoning. It was, wasn't it not?
well, it was in a half-acre zoning district, and we did change that to a 2-acre zoning district, which is more reflective. And some people said, "Well, why are you doing that? That land is owned by the
MSPCA.
Yeah, they're not going to develop that." Things sometimes change.
Right.
So,
Okay. Well, that's a fair point. In terms of the Valero land and the Milwaukee land, if you looked in your crystal ball, what sort of uses, what sort of facilities do you see as sort of being naturals to go out there?
well, we have called for that area to retain its characteristics as a commercial node along Old South Road. So, right now, it's an area that really was targeted for commercial use from the adoption of zoning, and that use had been present along there for years,
Right.
even before that. I think providing basic types of goods that are consistent with what is called the commercial neighborhood district are the kind of uses that would be there. I have at times, and I'll use this as an opportunity to say I think it would be a good place for maybe Marine Home Center to think about. We've had talk about the in-town bike path and the difficulty of putting that there. A store that sold general goods and basic needs might be better in a location like that has maybe some more parking and better access.
Do you see it as a reality, other than somebody perhaps like a local business like Marine Home Center, a reality of a big box store of any kind going into that? I mean, this is what people keep talking about.
Yeah.
And
I don't see that the market conditions are right for that. I think theoretically you could go there now with the current zoning and everything else. I don't think so. At least not on the scale.
In your crystal ball.
In my crystal ball, things may change.
Yeah.
You never know.
But the economics of those stores is very, very sensitive.
Right.
And the traffic that would be generated by Nantucket, I would think, would be a big issue.
I think so.
Does that hold true for another large grocery store too, do you think?
There's some discussion about that. There were inquiries from other potential grocery stores when the downtown Stop and Shop became available. Most people were not interested in that store because of the size, the difficulty of the loading,
the logistics.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know if there is. There's been discussions both pro and con whether that would be a good idea to have another competing store here. That, of all the locations on the island, that's probably one that would lend itself to it. So,
which is a good segue into traffic. The traffic on Old South Road is, by Nantucket standards, almost as bad as the corner by the high school.
Right.
And
two important spots, right?
And if Marine were to move out on Old South Road, or there would be other similar facilities out there that people were trying to get to from all over the island,
right,
it would really strain that. Now, am I not correct in saying that there are bylaws in place which would say there are no passing lanes, no turning lanes, no...
That was modified somewhat. So there's no passing turning lanes to be built in the country overlay district, which covers the majority of the island, but not this particular area. You're right, Old South Road corridor, if there's going to be continuing development there, and there is, because the zoning allows that, we'll need some sort of reconfiguration. The current system, a lot of the roads are dead ends off of Old South Road without through connections, and that's going to have to be seriously looked at.
And the other issue is, to put on my airport hat and be a little selfish about it for the moment, the access to the airport is constricted significantly,
right.
By all that traffic. Now, there is an alternate route, which is Nobodere Farm Road and the Sconset Road.
Yep.
Do you think signage would be appropriate to advise people, remind people that those are alternates? And
I think so. To a degree, signage has its advantages and disadvantages. I think most people eventually, at least long-term people, know their way around. But I think some sort of signage could help. I think the other alternative route that we've been talking about for a long time too is the Boulevard, Okarwa, that connection through Surfside.
But it's a long way around.
It is a long way, but I think that it's a great way to avoid some of
and then that takes you right back into that corner by the high school.
True. The roads all lead to significant points. Yeah. But I'll tell you, the planning commission and the planning board have through the years proposed lots of ways to deal with this, and we're not an implementing body. Basically town meeting or the board of selectmen need to follow through on the implementation. And there will be a time, I think, that we're going to have to make some choices on this. So the high school intersection, we have a roundabout designed for that there's been lots of debate on. But I think that is something that really does need to move forward.
Is there any thought of turning the Milestone Road roundabout into a real roundabout?
Yes. There's a design that was discussed, I want to say maybe 5 years ago about that. That will become all the more important if we continue to have the discussion about the hospital.
True.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So, what else is on your mind from a planning standpoint? Anything?
Well, we have a lot. It should be a very busy annual town meeting this year. We have FEMA flood maps to think about, new FEMA flood maps to adopt. There's a lot.
Does the town have to adopt those, or just in the context of zoning again?
In order to participate in the flood insurance program, the town does have to adopt those. And this is an update from the past maps. And it does.
More people are in the flood zone.
More people are in the flood zone. They factored in some wave action, at least in the harborfront area. So that's coming up. Discussion about the hospital. Discussion about probably the Valero and the Richmond properties, former Glowacki property. Hopefully, we're moving forward with relocating the tank farm downtown. Another big issue that's been on the docket for a long time.
One idea I had was moving the parking for the Grand Union downtown back into that area once the time, and turning at least part of the parking area in front of the Grand Union into a green space.
Right.
Does that have any viability?
I think so. That was one of the options that was looked at in the Wilkes Square plan. Especially if you're talking about the area closest to the harbor, making that sort of not divided up by roadways. And I think, the parking worked pretty well, the surface parking, considering it was adopted fairly late, didn't have a lot of lead-in for advertising, but I think that worked okay. And we're going to continue our discussions with National Grid to keep that going.
Good.
So.
Good. Andrew Vorse, Director of Planning, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.